maybe. The model and core functions for case management. Let's see, swap. Okay. And again, if you need to take a break, please feel free to self-manage. You have several wonderful experts that are going to be participating today. Jenny Williams from Northwest Georgia, J. Don Elliott and Amy Tucker from Northeast Georgia, and Brooke Rakestraw from Three Rivers. Great.
You want me to jump in?
Jump in.
All right. Case management uses a strengths-based or capacity-based philosophy to service delivery in contrast to a needs-based approach. One component of this would be engagement versus the structured interview, engagement being an unstructured conversational approach. Engagement begins with the first interaction. It's crucial for the worker to not only be friendly and open to the client in order to establish a level of trust, but also to have excellent listening and questioning skills in order to get an idea of what the true problem or problems are. Skills necessary to implement on the part of the social worker may include eye contact, empathy and empathetic responses, open-ended questions, focusing on the client's thoughts and feelings, active listening to ensure the client is heard, and even note-taking for the assessment purposes. Engagement suggests a process through which the client becomes active and involved in their treatment. We want to avoid a barrage of questions or checklists or our assessments. And I realize we do all have essential questions that have to be answered during the assessment, but it's really good to try to get much of the needed detail from the client's relaxed conversation using active listening during this stage of the process. So the important skills would include active listening. That's really vital when you are having that engagement time with the client. You want to find out what the client already knows about his situation and what is most important to the client. We want to hold meaningful conversations to determine the client's understanding of his situation, his values and goals, preferences, and then their ideas for intervention. We want to ask those difficult questions. Motivational interviewing is also a really key component, and we always want to allow time to make that connection with our client.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Amy Tucker, and I'm a social work case manager with Northeast Georgia. And my coworker Jadon and I will talk briefly about using a strengths-based approach versus a needs-based approach. A strengths-based approach focuses on the health, well-being, and recovery rather than the deficits or needs of the client or family. It puts the strengths and resources at the center of the helping process rather than their problems and pathologies. It looks at the totality of the person rather than reducing them to a set of deficits and dysfunctions. For me, as a case manager, this is where it's important that I am empathetic versus sympathetic. In the many years I've been providing case management assistance, I've learned along the way that showing empathy to a client and understanding them as an individual is a much more useful way to connect and therefore empower them to see their own strengths versus focusing on their weaknesses. Like we've said before in previous, or we've heard in previous presentations, in the first few years of my social work career, it was easy to take on the role of fixing the problem, whatever that problem may be. It didn't take long for me to realize that this wasn't the best approach, not only for me, but for them. And a strengths-based approach empowers the client and sets them up to be better able to handle the next crisis that does come their way. And Jadon will talk about the next slide.
Hi everyone, I'm Jadon. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So case management uses a strength-based or capacity-based philosophy to service. It emphasizes the human capacity for resilience, resistance, courage, thriving, and ingenuity. I had a really negative caregiver that started off an initial phone call with, "I can't get any help. I've called this place and that place and everywhere is a dead end, and this will be a dead." My response to her was, "Wow, you've been a tireless advocate. Let's see if we can work together to find you some help. I'm so impressed with all you have done and the research and time it must have taken." The dynamic changed completely when her strengths were acknowledged and she found a partner and a teammate. A strengths-based approach identifies the client's priorities, goals, and aspirations. It is crucial to have the clients help setting their own goals and to ensure that they have the tools, resources, and support from us. It allows us to not waste time on what we think that the client wants or needs, but it allows us to get to the bottom line and allows the client to be heard and to be valued. This simple phrase was a game changer for me when I started out. What would you like to see happen? It's such a simple question, but it helps so much. We then can have the opportunity to discuss how realistic their goals may be. We don't want to have a revolving door of clients who are referred over and over. We need to shift the framework to look at their strengths, so in the future they will be able to draw on these when the need arises. We need to stay away from blaming the client. We need to reframe traumas, problems, and obstacles as challenges, opportunities, or motivators. I love the term motivator. I think our clients sometimes just need a cheerleader, just need a motivator. That's all I have. If you want to go to the next slide, thanks.
Hey, I didn't introduce myself a while ago. I'm Jenny Williams from Northwest Georgia, and Brooke and I are going to talk about client goals versus the case manager driven goals. And we've already heard it said several times that case management does use a strengths-based or capacity-based philosophy to service delivery, in contrast to a needs-based approach in which the case manager is the one defining the goals. By using personal goal planning, the client gets to set the goal and the service plan is developed in collaboration with the client versus the goals being driven by the case manager. And this champions the rights of individuals and community to form and to achieve their own goals and aspirations. It even circles back to engagement that I was talking about a few minutes ago, when the clients are more likely to participate in something that they've actually had a voice in creating.
All right. And I'm Brooke from Three Rivers, and I'm just going to pick up. Another point to remember is not to get bogged down in our jargon. It's your job as the case manager to reframe the client's goals into their lingo, not force our lingo onto them. For example, don't use acronyms such as HCBS, case management, or homemaker services. Instead, you may want to use words such as, "Do you need a little help with this?" or "a little help in the home." Remember to take time to put the client's goals into real words that they can understand. Personal goal planning also clarifies who is the expert in the client's life. Is it the client or the case manager? This is something to keep in mind when setting goals with the client. A question you may ask during the personal goal setting process is, what is it that you want to accomplish and how do you want to get there? Long-term goals are often broken down into short-term tasks. For example, a client who fell at home and was hospitalized may have a goal to remain in their home independently. The long-term goal would be for the client to remain in their home and not return to the hospital. One of the short-term goals that the case manager could address with the client is to assist the client in reducing their fall risk. So the case manager may provide the client with a rollator if that's something that they need, and then they're unable to purchase one themselves or their payer source would not cover one. then the client could utilize the rollator to reduce their fall risk within their home. Additionally, you will want to look at who was assigned tasks to see who is more invested. Is it the client or the case manager? Ideally, you would like to have a good balance within the service plan. Lastly, be sure your actions are doable for the client. You may want to ask, is this a task that you need help with, or is this something that you can accomplish on your own? Remember, it's important for the client to actively and meaningfully participate in carrying out their service plan. Alrighty.
This is Amy again. I'm going to talk a minute about resource acquisition. Resource acquisition is the enhancement of the client's ability to identify and or access a wide array of formal and informal services versus service brokering. This builds on the capacity-based approach to teach transferable skills and negotiate with service providers and informal supports. So often we have clients that come to us with a need or a problem that cannot be fixed or solved with just putting a service in the home or helping them fill out an application. This is where we have to be willing to think outside of the box. Not all clients and families have the same needs, and this is where it's crucial to dig deeper and ask questions. For example, like we've already said, what is your goal? How have you been meeting this need up until now? What are your current social supports, and how can I support you in meeting this need? We want to be a resource and a helper, but we don't want to solve their problems for them. Otherwise, all we are doing is creating a revolving door for them to come back to us with every issue they encounter. Providing clients and families with the tools and resources to look at other options of support is crucial in our case management role. And Jadon will take over continuing collaboration.
All right, this is Jadon again, and I'm going to talk about continuing collaboration. Once we get that initial home visit or phone call out of the way and write our care plan, we can't just start calling once a month to see if the client's completed their task and check it off. Building on rapport and empathy is the greatest tools we have in our bag, but it's a process, and each phone call and visit needs to build on that initial rapport. Some clients take a while to open up and share information with us and trust us. The top 4 personality characteristics clients look for in a social worker are understanding, empathy, pleasantness, and the ability to put one at ease to make them feel comfortable. Ask the coworker at your office that handles the client surveys that come back about you. You might be able to get an idea on your own strengths and weaknesses that way. In continuing collaboration, we need to clarify roles. Don't come across as an expert, but as a partner with the client. Collaborative relationships place the social worker in a consultative capacity as a consultant, respecting clients' rights to fully participate in decisions directly affecting them. At the end of the day, the client has to live with the outcome and not us. When I first started as a case manager, I felt the need to comfort clients and tell them, I'm going to find you X, an apartment, a full-time aide, a new roof, a new house full of carpet. But what happens when you try to be that knight in shining armor? The client stops looking for X and eventually reminds you that you said you would handle it. And they tell every other social service worker, therapist, home health care aide, hospice worker that Jadon told them that you would help her find X. So unless you're able to magically create X or get lucky, you have actually shut down possible attempts by the client and others to help them locate X, whatever it is. Congratulations, you might have made the situation worse. We need to let the clients know we are there to work with them, but it requires a team effort. We need to clearly present information. Don't make this all complicated. Many of our clients are exhausted, ill, hungry, stressed, have vision, hearing, cognitive impairments. Often it's the worst time in their lives. Information can be lost. Review what was discussed. Take that minute to enter your contact information into their speed dial on that phone their daughter just got them, that they really just want their old flip phone back. If you don't want them to contact you, you might be in that burnout mode. Offer to repeat information discussed with relatives or neighbors that could not be present. I try to remember to ask clients if they have someone they would like for me to call or go over what we've discussed. Several times this has led to a resource or individual that ends up drastically making the situation better. At a home visit, make sure to write large when you're making those notes for them. Use that jumbo Sharpie marker. We all need to have one in our pocket or bag, but here's a PSA. Don't take a bag, or you might leave the house with something you didn't want. Bed bugs, for instance. Bed bugs, yes. Be careful out there. You all might remember 2020 as the year of the pandemic. I will remember it as the year of bed bugs at my house. If any of you would like to join my support group for the bed bug survivors, please let me know. We need to keep asking questions, always asking questions. It fosters a better understanding of needs. Shower chairs and bars are useless if they're not going to use them. We need to seek to understand others' point of views. We need to listen more than we talk. We need to keep asking questions because circumstances sometimes change while we're working with clients. Asking questions will often lead to the aha moments that Tom calls them, aha moments. We need to discuss possible outcomes. This resource may not work for you. We can add you to this waiting list, but it could be years. So we might need to come up with a better plan. We need to allow for recognition that the status quo is insufficient. If you continue to not bathe, eventually you will end up having to leave your home, and I know that's not something you ever want to do. But if you continue to drive, you will end up hurting yourself or others, or possibly end up in jail. If the client does not believe there's a problem, you're not going to get anywhere. We need to empower clients. Recently, I had a client who was desperately trying to find housing. If your region is like mine, we're getting a lot of those referrals. I'm getting evicted in 2 days and I need housing right away. I had this 76-year-old sharp woman who's very active on her laptop, and she and I frantically called on every house and apartment we could find. I finally asked her what she was saying specifically when she called places, and she told me that she is giving the story of how her low-down landlord did her wrong, and all the times he didn't fix this or that over the years. No wonder no one had openings for her. Everyone was scared that this lady was going to be a problem. Even though the client was justified in her anger, telling this long story on each call was not helping her find housing. That's when coaching comes in. I told her how that what she was saying might have been wrongly interpreted, and she understood why she needed to change her approach. We need to empower these clients with the tools they need to be successful now and in the future. We need to be flexible and think outside the box. And I'll leave you with this reminder. Collaboration reduces the likelihood of professional burnout. You can't want something more than the client. Allow the client the right of self-determination. Let your client be your partner and don't try to take it all on. Be a client motivator. That's all I've got. Thanks. If you want to turn to the next slide.
Hello?
Oh. Is that better?
Yes, that's much better.
I'm so sorry. I clicked a button and didn't realize I clicked a button. So,
Tom, you can't be doing that.
well, sometimes it's better that I not be heard. So yeah, back in the day, we would work with a client and we'd get to the point where either they were non-compliant and we had to discharge them, or we'd done everything we could do, or whatever. And we would suddenly go, okay, well, it looks like it's time to terminate you now. This gradual disengagement model is we start talking about discharge from the very beginning. In other words, this is not intended to make you dependent on our system. This is to help you learn how to navigate processes and to obtain the things that you need on your own. And so we start from the very beginning with that concept. This model is intended to give clients the self-reliance to become functional members of society after receiving help, to gain confidence and competence in their own abilities to navigate the system. Sensitive disengagement rather than the sudden termination helps demonstrate our respect for the client and the dignity that we offer to them. It links back to the client's goals and a capacity-based approach. I don't want somebody sticking their nose up in my business on an ongoing basis. Okay, so this notion of help me do what I need to do and then get out of my way is quite appealing to me, actually. Okay. Now, that doesn't necessarily, one more thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that I tell them right at the very beginning, well, this is a time-limited service. I can do that in more subtle ways and in more professional ways that still relay the intent of our goal is to help you be as interdependent or independent as possible. I think that's all of the model. Let me look, be sure. No, it's not. I lied. Okay. So we're going to talk about we talked about the model. Now we want to talk about some of the functions. There are several key functions of assessment, of case management. The first one we're going to talk about is assessment. And case management requires a comprehensive assessment of the individual's functional and cognitive ability, their limitations, needs, strengths, abilities, and resources. I put this special event sign on here because I really I encourage you to move away from this notion of assessment as an event. Whereas I jokingly say we're going to hold the client hostage for 3 hours while I check all the boxes that I need to check. Assessment is a process, and it takes place over time. And I'm going to suggest that really everything you do is part of your assessment because you're learning more about the client's values, their interests, what they see as their needs, what their capacities are, what their willingness to do is. And so I encourage you to look at everything as part of your assessment. There are some essential components of assessment that are external to the client, and those include your experience, your expertise, your observations, and your judgment. Okay? So as I'm assessing people, I'm taking what am I hearing, what am I seeing, and how does that match with my observation, my experience, what I've seen in the past, what my experience has taught me, and how I evaluate this current situation. We've talked periodically, and we'll talk more about relying on these core competencies to help us synthesize and analyze the information we get during assessments. And that starts looking at the art of case management versus the science of case management. It's important to include the consumer as the primary source of information wherever possible, but we may need to incorporate multiple sources of data if the client can't provide the information that we need. Assessment also can have an educational purpose to help the client or the caregiver understand more about the problems, strengths that you see, the availability of appropriate resources, and different options for care based on the assessments that we do. DAS has 3 required assessments. Those are the DON-R, the NSI, and the Food Security Survey. I highly recommend the use of the RAT for case management. I don't require it because some AAAs don't use it, but I do highly encourage it. And then we have a toolkit of specialized assessments that can be used. We're going to have a whole separate training session in week 3 on these core assessments. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Brooke to talk about service planning.
All right, thank you, Tom. I'm going to jump right in. So service planning or care planning is an essential component of long-term case management. It translates the assessment into a plan of action. This is the client's roadmap to get where they're going and where they would like to be. It also reflects the case manager's analysis and synthesis of multiple assessments. You may want to ask yourself, have I used all the information that I got from the different assessments to develop the care plan with the client? For example, if you use the NSI, the food security, the DON-R, and the GAD-7, if that was all completed with the client, you will want to be sure to incorporate goals identified from each assessment as you are creating the care plan with the client. Similarly, the client should reflect the care plan should reflect the client's values and preferences. For example, if it's important for the client to remain in their own home, what steps need to be taken by the client support system, or the case manager in order for this to happen. Some key ingredients of the care plan. What is the problem to be addressed as stated by the client? Remember, the client should be the person who is defining their plan of action. Another question you may want to ask is, what does the consumer consider most pressing, and why is this most important to the client? Another key ingredient of the care plan are action steps to address the problem. These steps define how the client is going to work towards achieving their goals. Resources. So both formal and informal resources are important to address the needs and goals identified by the client. For example, if the client is in need of transportation to get to and from their essential places, what resources are available to assist the client with this barrier? An example of a formal resource is the county transit program. This is a formal resource that's well established in many of the communities that the client can utilize for their transit needs. An example of an informal resource would be perhaps the client's neighbor and friend, Mr. Bob, who has offered to assist the client with transportation to and from the store in the past. When deciding on which resource to utilize, it is important for the client to take into account the frequency, costs, and timing associated with the need and the resource. Does the client need to go to the store every week? If so, is Mr. Bob willing to take him or her at no additional charge? Does the client have the $3 or $6 to cover the transportation cost of utilizing formal county transit? Another key component of care planning is assignment of responsibilities. Be clear who is assigned to each task and how the individual will participate in carrying out each task. Finally, the care plan can serve as a timetable for conducting assessment and review of the care plan. This is really important with your reassessment. And working with the client to create the care plan, be sure to ask the client what is a reasonable time that they think they will be able to accomplish the task discussed, and identify clear dates for goals to be reached. Remember, it is important to be flexible. Not everyone will be able to reach their goals in the time allotted. Reassessment and review of the care plan allows for time to review and adjust goals as necessary. All right, next slide. When creating the care plan or service plan, it's important to be aware of conflict. The most common conflict that can occur is between the client and their support system. Sometimes the client wants to do one thing and the support system wants to do another. For example, the client wants to remain in their own home and the family thinks it's not safe anymore. Another example is that the client would like to continue to work in their yard because they enjoy their flowers, but the family is concerned about the client falling. Another example of conflict that occurs between the client and their payer source. This is one I get a lot. The client wants a service that the payer source will not cover, or the client wants more services or a different service the HCBS or EDWP services cannot provide. Another conflict that can occur is between the client and the community. Now, sometimes this includes the case manager. The case manager may see the need for the client to address a goal that the client is resistant to working on. Remember, the client has the right and can refuse any services or any part of the care plan at any time. Another example would be if the client does not want to pay for assistance with their yard work, but the neighbors think the overgrown yard is a nuisance and complain to the client's landlord, thus leading to conflict between the client, the neighbors, and the landlord. Lastly, it's important to remember the key points when creating a care plan. The care plan should be written in terms of behavioral objectives. Goals should be action-oriented while focusing on outcome that the client wants to achieve. The care plan should also be SMART. That stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. The care plan should be flexible. Allow for flexibility when creating the care plan, and this flexibility is also important when completing reassessment of the care plan. The number of goals in the care plan depends on the client's situation as well as the client's abilities. Complex cases will usually have many goals and objectives, focusing on what is most important to the individual first, then addressing root causes with additional goals identified by the client. Short-term case management. Now, these situations may have only one or two goals and often may not lead to reassessment. That's why it's shorter-term case management. All right, next slide. Service plan coordination. Service plan coordination or implementation should be timely and cost-effective for the consumer. It includes the least intrusive and least restrictive options. It's also flexible. If something isn't working, find out why and adjust it if appropriate. Service plan coordination is the process of putting the plan into action. Activities should always include the following. Referrals. Oftentimes, case managers provide clients with a number of community resources and referrals and encourage the client to follow up as part of their service plan coordination. Another part of service plan coordination is communication. Communicating with the formal and informal resources, help providers, the client support system. These are all important, but you want to be sure you have written consent from the client if you're communicating with someone other than the client themselves. Lastly, it's important to empower the client and their support system by providing education and teaching them how to maximize access to needed services. Remember, issues and opportunities for improvement with coordination should lead back to ongoing assessment and communication with care providers. Tom and I will continue to discuss service plans in detail in week 2, so more to come on service plan and coordination.
Thank you, Brooke. So we're going to talk briefly about reassessments. Just as assessment is not an event, reassessment is not intended to be an event. DAS requirements for reassessment are that they're based on the risk level from the RAT, or based on changes in the client's situation. Some of the AAAs are not using the RAT, so I think they've defaulted to 1 year. I'm not a big fan of structured timeframes like that, but it's what we've got to work with. But the purpose of reassessment is exactly that. I want to look at what is the client's current situation? Has anything changed, and if so, what? And why did that information change? And then what adjustments need to be made to the service plan, if any at all? So the notion that the reassessment is sort of busy work to let the client continue to get whatever they were getting is not the correct purpose of reassessment. Just as my situation changes over time, we would expect these clients' situations to change over time as well. And so we want to adjust the reassess and adjust the service plan accordingly. Okay. And finally, discharge. This is where we get to say bye-bye. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because the case management policy has a pretty thorough list of when services can be discharged. Basically, discharge can be voluntarily by the client, which is, I think we've done all we want to do or all I want to do, and I've got this, thank you very much. The client and the case manager can agree that there's no further need to work together, or the case manager may determine that services are no longer beneficial. And again, the policy gives a fairly thorough, I hope, list of what those means. There may situations arise in which the current level of service provision is inadequate to ensure the safety and health of consumer. That's a challenging one, and that's one where I would encourage you to talk with your supervisor, talk with your peers, bring that to one of our case reviews, call up here. We're happy to have some conversation. But that requires our diligence in documenting our efforts to educate the client about, or the family, about what their needs are, what the community resources can do, what are appropriate level of care, and the dignity of risk conversation. Okay. I want to do a brief thing about what are allowable activities. Since all of you are working in the DAS data system, and you're reporting units, the following things can count as a unit. Any time spent on your assessment, whichever tool you're using, that can be counted. Your periodic reassessment, service plan development and coordination, any follow-up, whether it's by telephone, email, or in person, with clients, caregivers, their support system, any of those pieces. Your activities of coordinating services with other programs, other agencies, quality improvement with other agencies, advocacy on behalf of consumers that need assistance in accessing care, all of those can be counted as units. Also, your documentation, your time spent in doing case notes, data entry, programmatic reporting, all of those can be counted as an activity. The only things that really you cannot report as a unit are travel to and from the homes of the applicants or clients, and training. Okay. So, any questions?